Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into 2 Corinthians chapter 11.
Yeah, it's a really intense chapter. Lots of raw emotion and some pretty sharp defenses going on.
Definitely. We're going to look at the writer's big concerns, how he defends himself, and this really striking story of suffering he tells.
It gets quite personal, so let's dive in.
Okay, so right at the start, he asks the Corinthians to, quote, put up with a little of my foolishness.
But then he immediately adds, sort of pointedly, that they're already doing that.
Yeah, there's an edge there, isn't there? Like he knows he's about to say something unconventional.
Exactly. He feels he has to, though. He talks about this godly jealousy he has for them.
It's a strong phrase. He wants to present them as a pure virgin to Christ, he says, for one husband.
It shows this deep, almost parental protectiveness over their spiritual commitment. He laid the foundation, and he wants it to stay pure.
Which leads straight into his fear. He's worried.
He is. Worried that their minds might be led astray, just like he says Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning.
Bringing Eve into it really raises the stakes, doesn't it?
Mm.
Framing it as this primal, subtle kind of deception.
It does. It's not just a disagreement. It's something targeting their core devotion, their minds.
And what's the source of this potential deception? He's pretty clear.
Yeah, someone showing up preaching a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, or offering a different spirit, a different gospel.
So we're not talking minor details here. This is fundamental stuff.
Absolutely, different versions of the core message. And he seems, well, kind of frustrated with how they're handling it.
Right, he said they put up with it easily enough.
Which suggests maybe their discernment isn't quite what he hoped. They're maybe a bit too tolerant of these rival messages.
So thinking about this for you listening,
Mm.
how does this relate to today? This fear of being subtly led astray, the call for sincere and pure devotion.
Well, it makes you think, doesn't it, about all the messages we encounter. How do you stay anchored? How do you know which voices are genuinely helpful and which might be, pulling you off course even slightly?
Are we sometimes too quick to just put up with things that maybe compromise what we really believe?
That's the question it raises, I think. And it connects directly to his next point, defending himself against these rivals.
The ones he sarcastically calls super apostles.
Yes. He needs to establish his own legitimacy in contrast to them.
And he doesn't hold back. He says he's not in the least inferior to them. Pretty bold claim.
He puts himself right on their level, maybe even implicitly higher, despite how they might present themselves.
He even tackles a potential weakness head on. I may not be a trained speaker, he admits.
But immediately counters it. I do have knowledge, he says, and that knowledge has been made perfectly clear.
So, substance over style. He might not have the fancy rhetoric, maybe something the Corinthians liked in the others.
But he insists the core message, the knowledge he brought, was clear and sound. That's what matters.
Then he gets into his methods, which seem to be a real point of contention, specifically preaching free of charge.
Right. He asks, was it a sin for him to do that? To lower himself, financially speaking, to elevate them?
It implies this is a very deliberate choice, setting him apart from others who might have expected payment.
Exactly. He framed it as service, not as a sign he wasn't worthy of support.
And then comes that really striking line. I robbed other churches by receiving support from them so as to serve you.
Robbed. It's such a strong word. It's rhetorical, surely, but it grabs your attention.
He's saying, look, I did get support, but not from you. I took it from other communities, like Macedonia.
Specifically so I could minister to you without being a financial burden. He prioritized them in this way.
And he stresses, while he was actually with them, he wasn't a burden. He was supplied by others, and he plans to keep it that way.
It shows a consistent pattern. His ministry to them was financially independent of them.
Why? He gives a reason. It's tied to the truth of Christ, and he does it to, quote, cut the ground from under those who want an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things they boast about.
So it's strategic. He sees his self-sufficiency as a point of integrity that his rivals, who likely did take support from the Corinthians, couldn't match. They boast about their credentials. Well, he boasts about serving freely. It undermines their claim to equality on that front.
And then he just lays it out, calling these rivals false apostles, deceitful workmen masquerading as apostles of Christ.
No more subtlety there. He sees them as fakes, actively deceiving people.
He even compares the whole situation to Satan. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light.
Which explains why their deception might be so convincing. If the ultimate deceiver can look like pure goodness.
Then it's not surprising if his servants can look like servants of righteousness.
But he adds that grim warning. Their end will be what their actions deserve. He's convinced their path leads to destruction.
So reflecting on this part, how does this help us, figure out who's authentic today? Leaders, messages we hear, what can we learn from these different approaches to support and service?
It really pushes you to look beyond the surface, doesn't it? Beyond just charisma or credentials. This writer suggests authenticity involves how you live, how you serve, even down to finances.
Right. Are the methods consistent with the message? Does the leader's lifestyle match what they preach?
It makes you ask, what carries more weight? Polished presentation or demonstrable integrity, even if it looks like lowering oneself?
That's a good point. Okay, now the chapter takes this really big turn. He decides to boast, but he calls it foolishness.
Yes, this famous fool's boast. It's the longest part, and he's very self-aware about framing it this way.
He literally says, "Let no one take me for a fool," but then immediately says, "Receive me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting."
He's stepping into their arena, the arena of boasting, which he seems to think these rivals engage in, but he's going to do it his own way.
He clarifies, "I'm not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool, doing it in the way the world does, because many are boasting like that."
It's like he's saying, okay, you value worldly comparisons, let's compare. But my list is going to look different.
And he gets pretty sarcastic with the Corinthians here. "You gladly put up with fools since you are so wise."
Ouch. And then that really cutting line about how they put up with people who enslave, exploit, take advantage, push themselves forward, even slap them in the face.
He's pointing out their tolerance for what sounds like actual abuse from these other figures.
Contrasting it maybe with their potential judgment of him or his methods, it's a sharp critique of their values.
He even throws in, "To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that," meaning too weak to exploit them like the others did.
It's dripping with irony, turning the accusation of weakness back on them, reframing it as integrity. Brilliant, really.
So the foolish boasting begins. First, he matches the standard credentials. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Israelites? So am I. Abraham's descendants? So am I.
He's saying, okay, on these basic identity markers they might care about, I qualify. Check. But that's just the starting point.
Then comes the more section. And he knows it's unconventional, saying it's like he's out of my mind to talk like this.
Because now he starts listing things, but they're not achievements, they're hardships.
Worked much harder, in prison more frequently, flogged more severely, exposed to death again and again. It's a quantitative list of suffering.
This is his counter-resume. Not honors, but the sheer volume of pain and danger endured for the sake of his mission.
And the examples he gives are just brutal. Specific. 5 times the 40 lashes minus 1. That's 39 lashes, Roman punishment.
Designed for maximum pain just short of death. Then 3 times beaten with rods. Public. Violent.
Once stoned, basically. A lynching attempt.
Right.
3 times shipwrecked, spending whole night and day lost in the open sea.
These are traumas, life-threatening events. It paints a picture of constant extreme risk.
Constantly on the move, he says, facing danger everywhere. From rivers, bandits.
His own countrymen, Gentiles in the city, in the country, at sea, and even danger from false brothers, hostility from all sides.
And on top of the danger, just the grinding physical toll. Labored and toiled, often without sleep, hunger, thirst, lack of food, being cold and naked.
Basic survival needs often unmet. It was an exhausting, deprived way to live, not exactly the life of a successful super apostle.
And then he shifts from the external to the internal. "Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches."
The mental and emotional weight. It wasn't just physical hardship. It was this constant burden of responsibility for these scattered fledgling communities.
And you feel the empathy in his words. "Who is weak and I do not feel weak. Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn."
He's deeply connected to their struggles. Their vulnerability is his vulnerability. It's not detached leadership.
And he loops it all back to his main paradoxical theme for this boast. "If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness."
This is the core of it. He flips worldly boasting completely on its head. Everything the world sees as failure, shame, something to hide suffering, hardship, vulnerability he presents as his credentials.
These aren't signs of failure to him. They're evidence of his commitment, his following in Christ's path of suffering.
Exactly.
And he ends this whole section with a very specific, almost anticlimactic story, the escape from Damascus.
Right. The governor under King Aretas had the city guarded to arrest him. How did he escape?
He was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall, and slipped through his hands.
Lowered in a basket, not exactly a heroic Rambo-style escape, is it?
No, it sounds, well, kind of undignified, furtive, maybe even a bit embarrassing by worldly standards.
And yet he includes that in his list. He boasts about that. It's another mark of his weakness, his vulnerability, his reliance on others in a moment of peril.
And he has this solemn verification. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus knows that I am not lying, calling on God to witness the truth of this whole difficult list.
He stands by all of it, the beatings, the shipwrecks, and the basket escape, as the true measure of his ministry.
Wow. So when you take in this incredible list, this focus on weakness as a boast, what does it tell us about conviction? How does it challenge our usual ideas of strength or success?
It just completely turns them upside down. It suggests true authenticity, real commitment, isn't found in power or comfort or avoiding struggle. It's found in endurance through hardship, in embracing vulnerability.
It makes you question what qualifies someone, doesn't it? Is it the polished resume or the scars? Is success about never falling or about getting up, even if you need help getting lowered in a basket?
Precisely. It redefines strength not as overpowering force, but as faithful endurance, even when you look weak to the world.
So we've seen his deep concern for their devotion, his defense against these rivals based on his unusual methods, and then this powerful, paradoxical boast in his own suffering and weakness.
It's a portrait of leadership grounded in a totally different value system than his rivals, and maybe even than the Corinthians themselves at that moment.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you to chew on, thinking especially about that image of skating in a basket. In a world that so often values visible strength, control, never showing weakness, this chapter presents this radical alternative.
It really does.
So consider what real strength, real authenticity might look like when you're facing tough times or opposition. Is it always about winning in the conventional sense? Or could it sometimes be found in just enduring and being vulnerable, maybe even in finding a way through that looks, well, undignified like that basket?
What does it actually mean in practice to find strength and weakness, not just as a nice idea, but as something real, something lived?
Something to think about.
Ah.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.